The rescue. The fire was everywhere. It crackled and roared, a fierce beast hungry for everything it touched. Buildings were burning, their walls turning to ash in seconds. The smoke was thick, making it hard to breathe. But amidst the chaos, there was one sound that stood out above all, the sound of someone screaming. Captain Jake Larson ran toward the sound. He'd been through battles, skirmishes, and wars, but this was different. This wasn't a war zone. This was a peaceful alien village caught in a firestorm. He had no idea how it started, but he wasn't going to stand there while innocent people burned. His boots hit the dirt with every stride. The heat from the flames was unbearable, but he pushed forward, driven by the sound of the cry. He could see shapes moving in the smoke, but nothing clear. He didn't stop to think. He couldn't. His instincts took over. Then he saw her. She was struggling to get up from under a pile of broken wooden beams. Her clothes were torn and she was covered in ash and dirt, but her eyes were wide with fear. She was barely able to move, but somehow, she was still alive. Without a second thought, Jake dove toward her. The heat around them seemed to grow even stronger, as if the fire had taken notice of them, but Jake wasn't going to let the flames win. He grabbed the woman and pulled her out of the wreckage. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough from the smoke. She didn't respond. She was too weak to speak. Her breathing was shallow, and Jake could feel the weight of her body in his arms. He wasn't sure who she was, just another alien caught in the crossfire, he guessed. But that didn't matter. What mattered was getting her out of there. He scanned the area quickly, seeing no clear way out. The village was burning fast and the flames were spreading. Without thinking, he started running. The woman was heavy in his arms, but he couldn't stop. He pushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The fire was everywhere now, and he could feel the heat singeing the hairs on the back of his neck. But there was no turning back. He ran toward the edge of the village where the smoke was thinner and the fire wasn't as fierce. He didn't know where he was going, didn't care. As long as he could get her away from the fire, that was all that mattered. The flames crackled behind them, chasing them like wild animals, but Jake didn't stop. Finally, he reached the edge of the village. The air felt cooler here, though still heavy with smoke. He collapsed against a wall, trying to catch his breath. The woman in his arms was unconscious now, her body limp. He could see the burns on her skin, some severe, some just minor, but it didn't matter. He had to keep her alive. He checked her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. That was good enough, for now. Jake looked around. There was no one else in sight. The rest of the villagers had either fled or didn't make it. His heart sank at the thought, but he couldn't think about that now. He had to focus on the woman in his arms. He gently laid her down on the ground, hoping the fire wouldn't find them here, but the world was starting to spin. He was dizzy from the smoke and the heat. He had to act fast. Jake reached for his comm device, praying it still worked after all the chaos. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Captain Larson. I need immediate medical. Support location is near the east end of the village. There's a survivor. She's in critical condition. I repeat, we need help now." He didn't wait for a response. The woman's face was pale now, and she wasn't moving. Her breathing was slowing. He had to do something, anything. He tore a piece of cloth from his jacket and pressed it against the worst of her burns, trying to slow the bleeding. He could hear the fire roaring behind him, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered but her. "Come on," he muttered, his voice rough. "Stay with me. Don't die on me now." A moment later, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but then she looked straight into his eyes. She said something in a language he didn't understand, her voice weak but determined. Jake blinked, confused. He wasn't sure what she was saying, but there was a strange look in her eyes. It was almost like she was grateful. But there was something more, something deeper. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the look in her eyes seemed too knowing, too calm for someone who had just been pulled from a burning building. Before he could ask anything, she spoke again, this time in broken English. "Why did you save me?" Jake was taken aback. She wasn't screaming for help, she wasn't panicking. It was as if she expected him to save her. "Because it's what any decent person would do," he said, though he was still unsure why he was so determined to help her. She studied him for a moment longer, then whispered something that made no sense to him. "The throne is mine." Jake's brow furrowed. "What?" he asked, his voice hoarse. But before he could ask more, her eyes closed, and she fell back into unconsciousness. The mysterious stranger Jake's hands were shaking as he looked down at the unconscious woman. He couldn't understand it. He had saved countless lives during his service, but something about this one felt different. The way she looked at him when she first woke up, it was almost like she knew him, or like she expected him to be there. It didn't sit right with him. The smoke still hung thick in the air around them, but here, near the edge of the village, it had started to clear. The once blazing fire that had consumed everything in its path now felt distant, like it was just an echo of a nightmare. But the woman, she was real. Her breathing was still shallow, but there was a slight rise and fall in her chest. So she wasn't dead yet. Jake stared at her, unsure of what to do. The comm device on his wrist beeped, but he didn't answer it right away. His mind was still spinning, the confusion building. There were so many questions, and none of them made sense. Who was she? How did she survive the fire? Why hadn't she panicked when he saved her? He gently reached for her arm, ready to check her pulse again when her eyes shot open. Jake jumped back, surprised by how suddenly she had awoken. She blinked, confused at first, then focused on him, her expression softening as her lips parted in a barely audible whisper. "Why did you save me?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. The question sounded strange, almost as if she expected him to have an answer ready. But he didn't. He was just a soldier who saw a woman in need and reacted. What else was there to it? He opened his mouth to speak, but found himself at a loss for words. The simple truth felt too complicated. He cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. "Because it's the right thing to do." Her gaze remained steady on him. The fire had burnt so much of her skin, yet her eyes glistened with an intensity that almost didn't match the damage done to her body. There was a spark of intelligence, a calmness in those eyes that unsettled him. For a moment, there was an eerie silence between them. The crackling of distant flames and the soft whispers of the wind were the only sounds. Jake shifted uncomfortably. He could feel the weight of her stare, and it was starting to make him feel like there was more to her than he realized. Like he was being watched, studied, but by someone who knew more than she let on. Then, without warning, she said something in a language that was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It was smooth, melodic, but foreign to his ears. Jake's eyes widened. "What did you say?" She blinked, clearly noticing his confusion. Her lips curled into a small, faint smile, but there was something unreadable in it. She tried again. This time in broken English, though it still sounded strange. "The fire, my people." She stopped herself, her eyes darting around as if she were checking for anyone listening. "They are coming." "Who is coming?" Jake asked quickly, his protective instincts kicking in. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see enemy soldiers or some other danger closing in. But there was nothing but the smoldering remains of the village. Her eyes narrowed and she struggled to sit up, but Jake stopped her. "Take it easy," he said gently, pressing her back down. She was too weak to be sitting up just yet, especially after what she'd been through. She didn't protest, but the urgency in her voice remained. "The ones who hunt me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will come. Soon." Jake frowned. He had no idea what she was talking about, but her words didn't sit right with him. Who could be hunting her? And why was she so sure they would find her here? There were no signs of any ships in the sky, no sounds of military forces closing in. Before Jake could press her for more answers, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength, her grip firm despite her injuries. Her eyes locked with his, and for a second he could see the desperation there. "They know I am Not who I appear to be, she whispered. They will stop at nothing to find me. Jake's mind raced. What was she trying to say? Who was she really? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her than just a helpless civilian caught in a fire. Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate. Jake tensed, his hand instinctively going to the weapon holstered, at his side. He glanced around trying to locate the source of the noise, but all he could see were the ruins of the village stretching out in every direction. Then from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall, wearing the uniform of a high-ranking officer in the alien military. His face was grim, and he scanned the area with sharp eyes. As he stepped closer, Jake instinctively stood in front of the woman, blocking her from view. The officer's gaze flicked between them, then narrowed. You, he said, his voice low and cold. You should not have saved her. Jake's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just any soldier. This man knew who she was, and that didn't make sense. How could anyone know she was here, especially after the chaos of the fire? The officer took another step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a blade. Step aside, human, he ordered, his voice carrying an unmistakable command. She is not yours to protect. Jake's hand tightened on his weapon. He didn't know who this officer was, but if he thought Jake would just hand over the woman, he was sorely mistaken. I'm not going anywhere, Jake said firmly, his voice low but determined. You'll have to go through me first. The officer smirked, but there was no humor in it. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but you leave me no choice. The hidden truth. The officer's eyes glinted with something dangerous as he drew closer, his movements deliberate. Jake stood his ground, heart pounding in his chest. There was something about this alien soldier that felt wrong, an unease that gnawed at him. It wasn't just the way he looked at Jake. It was the air around him, the certainty in his presence that seemed to ripple like a storm waiting to break. Jake shifted his weight, gripping his weapon tighter, but he didn't pull it out. Not yet. He needed answers first. And he was starting to get the feeling that this officer had answers. Step aside, human, the officer repeated, his tone colder now, almost mocking. She is a fugitive, and you've made a terrible mistake in saving her. Jake's pulse quickened. Fugitive? What did he mean by that? The woman, whoever she was, hadn't seemed like a criminal. She had been nothing but grateful, albeit in a way that sent shivers down his spine. She had known something he didn't. And now this officer was claiming she was dangerous? No, Jake said, his voice unwavering. I'm not letting you. Take her. The officer's smirk deepened, and for a moment Jake thought he saw something flicker in his eyes, an emotion that wasn't anger, but rather pity. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but it left Jake with a cold feeling in his gut. You don't understand, the officer said, his voice softer now, but still commanding. You think you've saved her, but all you've done is signed your own death sentence. The words hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. His grip tightened on his weapon, and he took a step forward, his jaw clenched. What the hell does that mean? Jake demanded. The officer's gaze shifted to the woman lying behind Jake, her pale face half hidden by her disheveled hair. He seemed to hesitate for just a moment, as though weighing whether or not to reveal the truth. Finally, he spoke again, his voice dropping to a whisper. She is no mere civilian, he said slowly. She is royalty, the heir to a throne you could never imagine. Jake blinked, confusion flashing across his face. Royalty? This woman? He had no idea what the officer was talking about. She's a princess, the officer continued, his voice almost reverent. A figurehead in a galaxy-spanning empire, and you... He paused, his eyes narrowing as he sized Jake up. You've just made the most dangerous decision of your life. Jake's mind raced. The woman? A princess? But she looked nothing like royalty. She was covered in burns, her clothes torn and filthy, and she barely had the strength to sit up. How could this possibly be true? Before he could ask more questions, the woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she looked up at Jake, her eyes no longer clouded with confusion. They were sharp now, focused. "Do not listen to him," she said, her voice much stronger than before. "He lies." Jake's heart skipped a beat. She had regained enough strength to speak, and she seemed completely aware of the officer's presence now, as though she was no longer the weak, injured woman he had carried from the flames. The officer's expression darkened. He took a step back, raising his hand in a gesture of warning. "You will regret this, Princess. You cannot hide from your past. Your people will find you, and when they do, there will be no mercy." The woman's eyes narrowed in defiance. "I don't fear them, and neither should he." The officer clenched his fists, but before he could say anything more, a distant sound caught Jake's attention. It was faint at first, almost like the hum of an engine, far off in the sky. But it grew louder with each passing second, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. The officer's eyes widened. "No, it can't be." Jake turned toward the sound, his senses on high alert. The hum was growing louder now, and there was something unmistakable about it. It was the sound of a ship, a large one, and it was heading straight for them. The officer's face twisted into a mask of fear, and for the first time Jake saw him falter. "You're too late," he muttered under his breath. "They're coming for her, and they'll burn everything in their path to get her." Jake's gaze snapped back to the woman. "Who are they? Who is after you?" She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes locked on the officer, who was now backing away, his face contorted with frustration. The sound of the ship grew deafening, and Jake could feel the vibrations in the air as it descended toward them. "They are my people," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the roar of the approaching ship. "But they are not here to rescue me. They are here to destroy everything I've ever known." Jake's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what she was saying. How could this be? How could someone so seemingly innocent be at the center of such a dangerous conflict? Before he could ask more questions, the ship appeared overhead, blocking out the sun with its massive bulk. It was a warship, a heavily armed, imposing vessel that seemed to cast a shadow over everything below. Its sleek, dark silhouette was unmistakable, and Jake could feel the heat of its engines as it hovered above them. The officer glanced up at the ship, his eyes now filled with a mix of dread and anger. "You've done it now," he muttered almost to himself. "You've brought the wrath of the Empire down upon you." The ship's hatch opened, and several armed soldiers descended rapidly, landing with the grace of hunters closing in on their prey. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure in full battle armor, stepped forward, his helmet reflecting the harsh light of the flames surrounding them. Jake's heart pounded. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a military operation. And they were here for one thing: the woman. "She is to be brought in alive," the leader commanded, his voice cold and unwavering. "By order of the Empire." The woman's eyes locked with Jake's, and in that moment everything changed. She was no longer just a stranger he had saved. She was something far more dangerous and far more important than he could have ever imagined. And now Jake was in the middle of a war that was about to explode around him. The choice Jake's grip on his weapon tightened, his fingers nearly white from the pressure. The warship loomed overhead, blocking out the sun and casting the ground below into a dark, oppressive shadow. Soldiers, aliens in full combat armor, had surrounded them, their weapons raised and aimed with cold precision. There was no way out, no escape. The woman beside him seemed eerily calm, her eyes scanning the soldiers as if she had seen this all before. She didn't flinch when the leader of the alien forces stepped forward, his face hidden behind the reflective visor of his helmet, his presence commanding. "Do not resist," the alien leader ordered, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "This is your final chance to surrender. Come with us quietly, and no further harm will come to you." Jake's mind raced. What could he do? These soldiers were far beyond his abilities, well-trained, well-equipped, and clearly part of an organized military force. They weren't just any soldiers. They were elite, and they were here for her. For the first time since this whole nightmare had started, Jake felt the weight of his own mortality. This wasn't a fight he could win, not without backup, not without more resources. But there was something in his chest, something deep down, that wouldn't let him back down. He couldn't just give up on her. Not when he had come this far, the A. Woman didn't move as the alien soldiers closed in. She stood beside him, her expression a mixture of defiance and something else. It was almost like she was resigned to what was coming. But there was a flicker in her eyes, something Jake could barely make out, something that told him she had a plan. The alien leader took another step forward, his posture unyielding. "You will come with us. This is your only chance." Jake's heart raced. His mind was screaming for a way out, for some kind of solution. He glanced at the woman, hoping for some kind of sign, but instead she looked up at the officer with something he hadn't expected. Pity. "She doesn't belong to you," Jake said, his voice low but steady, his tone filled with something he didn't fully understand. "None of you have the right to take her." The officer's eyes flickered with anger, but there was something else in them, something darker. "You are naive, human. You have no idea what you are dealing with." Jake stood firm. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but it didn't matter anymore. She had saved him from the fire, and now it was his turn to save her. He would find a way. But the woman spoke then, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the tension like a blade. "It's too late." Jake's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving the alien leader. "The Empire has already decided. You cannot protect me. No one can." Jake's breath caught in his throat. The way she spoke, like she had already accepted her fate, tore at him. This wasn't just a woman in need of rescue. This was someone who had lived in a world far beyond anything Jake could comprehend. The alien leader spoke again, his voice cold, almost clinical. "She knows the truth, human. You don't. She is a threat to everything we've built, to the Empire, and she will never be allowed to live freely." Jake's mind whirled. A threat? How could she be a threat? She wasn't some kind of super soldier. She was injured. She was barely able to stand. But the way they spoke about her, it was as if she were a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. "What do you want with her?" Jake demanded, his voice rising with frustration. The leader didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to his soldiers, giving them a silent command. Without a word, they moved into position, closing in tighter around Jake and the woman. "Nothing personal, human," the leader finally said. "But this is an order. We will take her and we will eliminate anyone who stands in our way." Suddenly, the woman's voice rang out, sharp and full of authority, so different from the soft, almost defeated tone she had used before. "Stop." Jake turned in shock, his eyes wide as she stepped forward, her posture straightening. The change in her was instant, like a switch had been flipped. Gone was the weak, vulnerable woman he had carried out of the flames. In her place stood someone entirely different, someone powerful. The alien leader paused, looking at her in confusion. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice betraying his uncertainty. "You know what this is," she said, her voice now carrying the weight of command. "I am the rightful heir to the throne, and you will not take me without paying the price." The alien soldiers froze, their weapons still trained on her. For a moment, there was an unsettling silence. Jake watched in disbelief as the woman's eyes glowed faintly, an eerie, otherworldly light flickering in them. He had seen strange things in his time, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The leader's mask seemed to falter for the first time, his expression showing a rare moment of doubt. "Impossible," he muttered, almost to himself. "Not impossible," she said, her voice steady. "And not negotiable. You will leave here or I will make you leave." Jake was caught between shock and confusion. What had just happened? Who was this woman really? How could she be royalty And why had she hidden it from him? But there was no time to process it all. The situation had just escalated beyond anything Jake could have imagined. The soldiers were watching her now, waiting for their next move. For a long moment, the alien leader didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the woman, as though trying to decipher whether she was bluffing. Finally, he straightened, his voice low and controlled but laced with tension. "You have no idea what you're asking, Princess," he said, his tone now filled with a strange mix of admiration and disdain. "But if you think you can stand against the Empire, then I suggest you prepare yourself for what comes next." Jake's mind was racing. Whatever was happening, it was far beyond anything he had ever prepared for. The woman he had saved, she wasn't just a stranger. She wasn't just an innocent victim. She was a force of nature, and Jake had just been dragged into something much larger than himself. The war was about to begin, and Jake had a choice to make: stand with her or stand aside. Either way, there was no going back. The betrayal, the Kia. Standoff in the open field felt like it was stretching into eternity. The air was thick with the tension of an impending storm, and the ground beneath Jake's boots felt as if it were trembling, as though even the earth knew something monumental was about to unfold. The alien soldiers hadn't moved. Their weapons were still raised, aimed directly at the woman, his princess. She had confirmed it, without a doubt, and Jake still couldn't fully process what she had said. A princess, the heir to an empire. It didn't make sense. She had seemed so ordinary. The alien leader's helmet gleamed in the light, reflecting the shifting clouds overhead, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, never left her. Jake could see the war between uncertainty and command play out in his mind. He was trying to figure out if she was bluffing, and maybe, just maybe, he thought she was. But then she raised her head higher, her spine straight like she had just stepped into the role that had always been hers. "You're making a mistake," the alien leader said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of control. "You have no idea what you're doing. You've already sealed your fate." But she only smiled, almost pityingly. "You think you can scare me with words?" Her voice was ice cold, unflinching. "I have lived 1,000 lifetimes in the shadows, hidden from those who would seek to control me. You are nothing compared to the forces I have faced." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The way she spoke, like she had been through wars, far worse than this, was both terrifying and oddly comforting. She had power. Real power. The kind that made entire worlds bow. The alien leader's voice turned dangerous, a deep rumble in his throat. "You don't even understand what's at stake, Princess. If you try to defy us, the consequences will ripple across the galaxy, and I will enjoy watching you burn." Jake flinched at the cruel threat, but the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her chin higher, her eyes glowing faintly like they were catching the light from a distant star. "You think you can break me? I was born in the fire." Suddenly, without warning, the air around them seemed to shift. The ground vibrated beneath their feet, and Jake's breath hitched as the unmistakable sound of engines roared through the sky. A ship, a massive one, a ship that didn't belong to the Empire but to something else, something far older. The alien leader's face twisted in fury. "No, it can't be, not now, not here." "Look up," the woman said calmly, turning, her gaze toward the sky. Jake followed her gaze. A shadow blotted out the sun, and in its place a massive craft appeared, its design alien, sleek and unmistakably ancient. It was unlike anything Jake had seen before, and for a moment he was struck by its sheer size. It looked like it had been built centuries ago, yet its technology was far beyond anything the Empire possessed. It was then that he realized this wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a declaration. A warship like that didn't come in peace, and if it was here for her, well, then they were all in much deeper than they had ever imagined. The alien soldier shifted, visibly uneasy. The leader's calm facade began to crack, and he stepped back, muttering under his breath. This shouldn't be happening. It's impossible. She's supposed to be dead." Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what was going on. Who were these people? Why had the woman, his princess, been so far from home, hiding out here, on this strange planet, when it was clear she had the power to call on an entire fleet of warships? What was she running from? The woman stepped forward, her eyes still fixed on the leader. You were never meant to catch me. The moment you targeted me, you sealed your own fate. You cannot stop what is already in motion. Jake barely had time to comprehend her words before the first explosion rocked the ground beneath them. He hit the dirt, instinctively covering his head, as fire and debris rained down around them. The sound of metal tearing through the air was deafening. He looked up, eyes wide, as the alien soldiers scrambled for cover, and the massive warship above unleashed a barrage of energy blasts down onto the battlefield. The leader's helmet exploded, with a sudden terrifying crack, and he was thrown back by the shockwave. Jake's ears rang from the blast, but it wasn't the explosion that had his attention. It was the woman, the princess. She stood unaffected, her posture as regal as ever, as though the destruction around her was nothing more than a passing storm. The alien forces were retreating, pulling back in confusion and panic. Some of them ran for the cover of the hills, while others fired back into the sky. But the barrage from the warship above kept coming, relentless, unforgiving. It was clear. This wasn't a rescue. This was a takeover. Jake scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of the chaos. The woman was already moving, stepping through the devastation as if she were walking through a garden, unscathed by the firestorm around her. Come on, she called to him, her voice cutting through the cacophony of explosions. We don't have much time. Jake blinked, momentarily stunned. He was still trying to process what had just happened. The battle was far from over, but the woman, his princess, was already moving, as though everything had already been decided. As though they had already won. Without another word, she grabbed his arm, pulling him toward a nearby structure that had somehow withstood the blast. They ducked into the shadows, hidden from view as the warship continued to rain hell down on the alien forces. Jake looked at her, his heart racing. What the hell is going on? Her eyes softened, but the fire in them remained. You don't know the half of it yet, Jake, but you will. You've just made a choice, a dangerous one, and now you're in this with me. Before he could respond, the ground beneath them shook again, this time much more violently. Jake looked out over the horizon, his breath catching in his throat. In the distance, he could see a larger fleet coming, more ships, more soldiers, and the real battle was only just beginning. The choice, the sky above had turned a violent shade of crimson, as if the very heavens were caught in the violence below. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he crouched in the shadow of the stone ruins, watching the scene unfold. The warship overhead continued its relentless bombardment, a looming reminder of the power the woman, his princess, held in her hands. They had barely escaped the chaos of the field. The alien forces were retreating, but Jake knew that wouldn't last long. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everything. And the woman beside him, the one he had thought was just an ordinary girl, was now at the center of something far bigger than either of them. What's happening? Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of distant explosions. The princess's gaze was locked onto the horizon, her eyes steely, unwavering. The war is just beginning, Jake. You've seen it now. You've seen what they've done, what they've tried to do to me. But why? Jake's voice broke as the weight of it all pressed down on him. Why keep it a secret? Why all this deception? Her lips twisted into a bitter smile. Because power is dangerous, Jake. The moment the truth gets out, everything changes, not just for me, but for the galaxy. And for you. Jake's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, for me? The princess turned toward him, her expression shifting, the icy armor she had worn since their escape slipping just slightly. For a brief moment, Jake saw something human in her, a vulnerability he hadn't expected. You've made a choice, she said softly, her voice almost regretful. You've chosen to stand with me, but you don't know what that means. You're no longer just a human. You're a part of something far larger now. Jake shook his head, I'm just a guy who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't understand any of this." Her eyes softened. "No, you're more than that now, and it's time you understood." Just then, the ground beneath them trembled, and the sky seemed to crack as a massive shape appeared overhead. Another ship, bigger than the first, its size nearly blocking out the light. It was a monstrosity, a warship built for destruction, its sleek black surface reflecting the flames from below. Jake's breath caught in his throat as it hovered above, its engines making a sound that was part thunder, part pure malevolent power. "They're here," the princess murmured. "They? Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful as if the weight of the situation was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. "They are the ones who will decide everything." Jake followed her, his heart thundering. His legs were heavy with fear, but the look in her eyes, the determination, the quiet strength, compelled him to move. He wasn't sure what he was doing or why, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her. Not now. As they reached a narrow passageway in the ruins, a blast from the enemy forces rocked the ground, sending debris scattering into the air. Jake flinched, pulling the princess behind a large column just as another blast came dangerously. Close, the heat of it singed his skin. "They're coming for us," Jake said, his voice low, urgent. "We need to move faster." The princess didn't answer, her focus absolute. But she didn't need to speak. Her actions told Jake everything he needed to know. She had a plan, and it was already in motion. Jake barely had time to comprehend what she was doing when she pressed her palm to a stone surface on the side of the ruined building. A soft click sounded and a hidden doorway slid open in front of them, revealing a dark corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. Without hesitation, the princess led the way, her steps sure, her mind already far ahead of Jake's. They moved, quickly, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the dark as distant blasts shook the very foundation of the building. Jake glanced behind him, his nerves on edge, expecting the worst at every corner. "Where are we going?" he asked, his breath coming faster now. "To the heart of the storm," she replied cryptically, her voice unwavering. Jake didn't have time to question her further. The distant rumble of engines told him the enemy was closing in fast. He had to trust her, and he didn't even fully understand why. Minutes later, they emerged into an underground chamber, vast, cavernous, and almost too quiet. The air was thick with the scent of ancient stone and the heavy weight of something ancient, something forgotten. In the center of the room stood a massive console, its surface etched with strange markings that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Jake stopped dead in his tracks. "What is this place?" The princess's gaze was fixed on the console, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "This is where it all began. The heart of my empire long lost. A place where the power to control the galaxy lies hidden." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. The power to control the galaxy? Was she telling him the truth? Could this place really be that important? Suddenly a voice echoed from the shadows, cold and chilling, as though it belonged to the very darkness itself. "You really thought you could escape?" Jake spun around, his heart skipping a beat, as a figure stepped forward from the shadows. A man, no, not a man, something else. Tall, with sharp features and eyes that glowed like molten metal. He was an alien, but not one Jake had seen before. His armor was unlike anything Jake had ever encountered, sleek and adorned with symbols Jake couldn't recognize. The princess stiffened beside him. "You shouldn't have come." The alien's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can hide from me forever, princess? It's over. It all ends here." Jake stepped in front of her instinctively, his body tense with fear and defiance. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The alien laughed, low and menacing. "You? You're nothing but a fool who stumbled into a war you don't understand. But you're right about one thing. This ends here. And now we're going to make sure you regret ever interfering." Jake's blood ran cold. It was clear now. There was no turning back. This was the final confrontation, the moment where everything changed. And whatever happened next, there was no escaping it. The final choice. The room was deathly silent, the air thick with the weight of impending doom. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the alien figure stepped closer, the sound of his heavy boots reverberating off the cold stone walls. Every instinct screamed at Jake to run, but he couldn't. Not now. Not when he was so close to the truth. The alien's glowing eyes were fixed on him, studying him with an eerie intensity. His armor reflected the dim, flickering lights of the underground chamber, casting twisted shadows across the walls. "You should not have interfered," the alien said, his voice a low growl, each word dripping with malice. "This was never your fight, human. You were a pawn from the moment you stumbled into her life." Jake clenched his fists. "If I'm a pawn, then what does that make you? A puppet?" The alien's lip curled into a twisted smile, but there was no amusement in it. "No, I'm the one who pulls the strings. I was sent to find her, to make sure she could never escape. And now, I'll make sure she never leads an army, never unites her people." The princess, still standing beside Jake, remained eerily calm. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jake could see the fire that had once burned in her chest, the strength that had kept her going for so long. She stepped forward, placing herself between Jake and the alien, her presence commanding. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady, but there was a note of sorrow in it. "You think you can stop me, but you cannot. I have already chosen my path. And you," she turned to Jake, her gaze softening, "have already chosen yours." Jake stared at her, confused. "What are you saying?" The alien laughed, a sound that was both mocking and dangerous. "Oh, you don't know? You still don't know? You've been walking blind this whole time. She's not just any princess, human. She's the princess, the one who was destined to rule. And if you think she'll let you walk away from this, enough!" The princess's voice cut through the alien's words like a blade. She turned to Jake, her expression no longer soft but sharp, determined. "I didn't bring you into this world to be a casualty, but I did bring you here for a reason." Jake's breath caught in his throat as the gravity of her words hit him. "A reason?" The alien growled, stepping forward again, but this time, Jake noticed something strange. The princess didn't back down. She raised her hand, and the energy in the room seemed to shift. The ancient console at the center of the chamber hummed to life, the symbols on its surface glowing brighter with every second. "Don't do it," the alien warned. "If you activate that device, you will unleash chaos. Do you think you can control the power of the ancients?" The princess turned to face him, her eyes now glowing faintly with a fierce, almost terrifying intensity. "I don't need to control it, I just need to be its vessel." Jake's mind reeled, his thoughts spinning. "Vessel, what does that mean?" The princess met his gaze, her expression one of sorrow mixed with resolve. "I wasn't just hiding, Jake. I wasn't just a princess in exile. I was a prisoner. The power inside me was meant to be sealed forever. But the day I met you, the day you helped me escape, the seal started to weaken. I didn't understand it at first, but now I know." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "I am the key," she interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. "The key to the return of the ancient empire. The key to the greatest power the galaxy has ever seen. And I can't run anymore. I can't hide. The universe is already coming. For me." Before Jake could respond, the alien lunged at her, but she was faster. With a flick of her hand, the air around her crackled with energy. The alien was thrown back against the wall, slamming into it with enough force to crack the stone. His helmet shattered, and Jake caught a glimpse of his face, twisted in pain and fury. But the princess didn't give him a second glance. Her attention was fully on the console now. She stepped forward, her fingers moving over the ancient controls with an almost reverent precision. As she did, the symbols on the console shifted, and the entire room seemed to tremble, as if the very foundations of the planet were waking up. Jake's pulse quickened. What are you doing?" She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told him everything. She was unlocking something that had been hidden for millennia. And when it was unleashed, there would be no going back. The ground beneath their feet rumbled violently, and the air grew thick with energy. The console's symbols blazed brighter, casting an eerie light across the room. Jake stumbled back, trying to shield his eyes from the overwhelming brightness, but it was no use. The power in the room was too strong, too intense. And then, with a deafening roar, the chamber erupted in light. Jake was thrown backward, crashing into the stone floor. His ears rang, his vision spinning as the light consumed everything around him. He felt like he was being pulled in every direction at once, as if reality itself were unraveling. When the light finally dimmed, Jake's senses slowly began to return. He pushed himself to his feet, blinking against the disorienting after effects. The chamber was silent now, the energy in the air a mere hum. But something had changed. Something was different. He looked around, and his gaze landed on the princess. She stood at the center of the room, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The power that had once been contained within her was now fully unleashed, and the world would never be the same again. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, the alien figure, broken but alive, rose to his feet, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You fool," he spat. "You've doomed us all. You don't know what you've just unleashed." The princess turned to face him, her expression cold, unyielding. "I know exactly what I've unleashed, and it's only the beginning." As the alien advanced, Jake's heart raced. The final choice had been made. There was no turning back. The galaxy was on the edge of war, and he was right in the middle of it. But what terrified him more than anything was the one question that lingered in his mind. Had they truly won?